On Christmas Eve, single dad Henry Carter arrived at the glass and marble mansion only planning to fix a burst pipe. Snow clung to his worn work boots as he followed the icy, perfect housekeeper through glittering halls toward the basement, upstairs. Laughter and crystal chimes from the CEO's party rained down like a world he didn't belong to. When the heating suddenly cut out and panic rippled through the guests, Henry was ordered upstairs. There, in the doorway of a dim nursery, a small blonde girl clutched his sleeve and whispered, "Stay with us, please," as her mother watched, stunned, silent. The morning had begun like any other winter day for Henry Carter. He woke before dawn in a small rental apartment on the working-class side of town, where the paint peeled in quiet surrender and the radiator clanked its familiar protest against the cold. Yet, despite its imperfections, the apartment held a warmth that money could not buy. Every crooked shelf had been straightened by his own hands. Every squeaky floorboard had been silenced with patience and wood glue. In the corner stood a miniature Christmas tree, no taller than his daughter, decorated with homemade ornaments, cheap tinsel, and a few plastic baubles that caught the pale morning light like tiny promises. Audrey Carter padded across the cold wooden floor in bare feet, her favorite pillow clutched against her chest. She wrapped her arms around her father from behind as he stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. Her voice was still thick with sleep when she asked if tonight would be like Christmas in the movies, with a roast chicken and music and snow falling outside the window. Henry turned and knelt to meet her eyes, his smile gentle but careful. He never made promises he could not keep. Instead, he told her they would have their own kind of special, and that was enough. He opened the refrigerator, surveying the modest contents, mentally calculating how to stretch what they had into something that felt like celebration. As Henry dressed for work, pulling on his faded work jacket and checking his tool bag for the essentials, Audrey appeared beside him with a folded piece of paper. She had drawn it that morning while he slept. The crayon figures showed a tall man and a small girl standing beside a Christmas tree, their stick figure hands touching. Above them, in wobbly letters, she had written "Merry Christmas." Henry felt his throat tighten. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart, where it would stay all night like a talisman against whatever the world might throw at him. There had been a time when Henry's life looked very different. He had studied mechanical engineering, graduated near the top of his class, and taken a promising position with a major construction firm. He remembered the day he stood in a conference room full of executives, pointing at blueprints and explaining why the contractor's cost-cutting measures would compromise the building's infrastructure. He remembered the dismissive wave of the project manager's hand, the condescending smile, the way they called him just a junior technician with too many opinions. Within a month, he was let go. The official reason was budget restructuring. The real reason was that he had dared to speak the truth to men who did not want to hear it. After that, the good jobs dried up. Henry drifted through a series of technical positions, each one more invisible than the last. He fixed what others broke. He maintained systems that no one thought about until they failed. And when his wife grew sick, he took whatever work he could find, chasing paychecks while sitting beside her hospital bed at night, holding her hand until she no longer had the strength to hold his back. Now it was just him and Audrey, and every decision he made was filtered through a single question: what does my daughter need? The photograph of his wife still hung on the wall above the television, her smile frozen in a moment before the illness took hold. Beside it sat a teacup she had loved, one he could never bring himself to use, and a half-finished knitting project she had been working on when she could no longer hold the needles. Henry did not dwell on these things. He simply moved through their presence each day, acknowledging the absence they represented while refusing to let grief consume the life he was trying to build for Audrey. Across town, on a hill overlooking the city, the Constance estate gleamed like a frozen palace. The mansion was all glass and marble, surrounded by security cameras and wrought iron gates, its grounds transformed into a winter wonderland of professionally designed LED displays. Inside, a small army of staff prepared for the evening's Christmas Eve gala. Caterers arranged silver trays, florists adjusted centerpieces. A string quartet tuned their instruments in the corner of the grand ballroom, while technicians tested the lighting until every crystal chandelier sparkled like captured starlight. Alexandra Constance stood before a full-length mirror in her bedroom, examining her reflection with the critical eye of someone who had learned that image was everything. The red dress hugged her figure perfectly, the deep V neckline drawing attention upward to the diamond earrings that caught the light with each subtle movement of her head. Her makeup was flawless, her hair swept into an elegant updo, her expression a carefully constructed mask of confidence and control. But when she glanced at her desk, cluttered with financial reports and urgent emails from the board of directors, something flickered behind her eyes that looked very much like exhaustion. In a room down the hall, 7-year-old Larissa Constance sat alone in a bedroom that looked like it had been designed by a toy company's marketing department. The canopy bed was draped in silk. The shelves overflowed with dolls and stuffed animals. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated by professionals to match the mansion's aesthetic. Yet Larissa ignored all of it. She sat at a small table, drawing with crayons on expensive paper. The picture showed 3 figures beside a Christmas tree, a mother, a father, and a child, all holding hands. When her nanny Amanda entered to check on her, Larissa looked up with hopeful eyes and asked if her father was coming tonight. Amanda's hesitation was answer enough. She suggested Larissa play with her dolls and quickly changed the subject. The phone call from Oliver Flynn came while Alexandra was reviewing the guest list with her assistant. Her ex-husband's voice carried the particular blend of charm and indifference that had characterized their entire marriage. Something had come up. He explained. A business opportunity. He would not be able to pick up Larissa for their scheduled Christmas visit. Perhaps next week. Perhaps after the new year. His tone suggested he was doing everyone a favor by even bothering to call. Alexandra ended the conversation without argument. There were photographers downstairs. There were board members to impress. There was a narrative to control. The guilt she felt about her daughter would have to wait. The evening of December 24th found Henry and Audrey in their small apartment, the smell of roasting chicken filling the air with warmth. Henry had come home early, determined to give his daughter the Christmas Eve she deserved. Together, they added the final touches to their tree, Audrey carefully placing a star she had cut from cardboard and covered in aluminum foil on the very top. It sat slightly crooked, catching the light from the window, and Henry declared it the most beautiful tree topper he had ever seen. They were just sitting down to eat when Henry's phone rang. He recognized the number immediately, the dispatch line from the service company that gave him most of his work. His finger hovered over the decline button, but years of conditioning made him answer instead. The dispatcher spoke quickly. There was an emergency at a mansion in the wealthy district, a burst pipe. The regular technicians had all refused to work on Christmas Eve. Henry was the last resort. The pay would be double, plus a bonus if he finished before midnight. Henry looked at Audrey across the small table, at the steam rising from their modest meal, at the crooked star atop their homemade tree. He thought about the stack of bills on the counter, the rent due in a week, the winter boots Audrey needed but he could not yet afford. When he knelt beside his daughter to explain that someone needed help and he had to go, her face fell for only a moment before she composed herself with a maturity no 7-year-old should possess. She told him to go help the people, that she would watch the clock and wait for him to come home so they could open presents together. She asked him to take a picture of the rich people's Christmas tree so she could see how they decorated it. Henry pulled her into a fierce embrace, promising to return before midnight. He took the drawing from his jacket pocket, showed her that he was carrying her with him, and tucked it back against his heart. Then he gathered his tools and walked out into the falling snow, leaving behind the warmth of their small apartment for the cold unknown of the night ahead. The drive to the wealthy district felt like traveling between worlds. Henry's old work truck rattled past homes that grew progressively larger and more elaborate, their Christmas displays shifting from modest strings of lights to professional installations that probably cost more than his annual salary. When he reached the gates of the Constance estate, he felt the full weight of his displacement. His truck looked like a relic among the Mercedes and BMWs lining the curved driveway. His work clothes marked him as someone who had entered through the wrong door. The security guard, a stern man named Finn, approached his window with obvious skepticism. He demanded work orders, identification, verification codes, when Henry provided everything. Finn studied the documents as if searching for fraud before finally activating the gate. His parting comment was that Henry was 10 minutes late and that Miss Constance did not tolerate delays. Henry bit back his response about the blizzard conditions and simply drove through, his jaw tight with the familiar frustration of being judged before being known. Inside the mansion, the contrast was staggering. Henry's boots, wet with snow and street slush, left marks on marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than his monthly rent. Crystal chandeliers scattered light like diamonds. A string quartet played elegant music that seemed to mock his presence. Everywhere he looked, beautiful people in beautiful clothes held champagne flutes and laughed at things that were probably not funny, performing wealth for each other in an endless theatrical production. Helen, the housekeeper, intercepted him before he could take more than a few steps. She was an older woman with a rigid posture and a face that suggested she had long ago stopped being impressed by anything. She handed him a pair of plastic shoe covers and directed him to the service entrance, her tone making clear that he was not to be seen by the guests under any circumstances. Henry followed her through back hallways and service corridors, invisible passages designed to keep the working class hidden from those who benefited from their labor. In the grand ballroom, Alexandra Constance had taken her position at the top of the sweeping staircase. Champagne in hand, smile fixed in place. She welcomed board members and investors, accepted compliments on her leadership, deflected subtle criticisms from Clinton George, the powerful board member who had never quite accepted a woman at the helm of the company. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Everything was under control, when her assistant whispered that there was a plumbing issue being handled in the basement. Alexandra dismissed it with a wave. That was what staff was for. Down in the mechanical room, Henry surveyed the damage with growing concern. The pipe that had burst was just a symptom of a much larger problem. He traced the lines with his flashlight, noting the substandard materials, the improper joints, the evidence of previous repairs that had been more cosmetic than structural. When he checked the pressure gauges, his concern deepened. The entire system was under stress. The cold weather and the increased demand from the party above were pushing everything toward a breaking point. He found old blueprints in a filing cabinet and compared them to the actual installation. The discrepancy made his stomach drop. The original plans specified high-quality materials and proper safety margins. What had actually been installed was cheaper, thinner, designed to pass inspection rather than to last. And then he saw the contractor's stamp on the work order, and memory crashed over him like cold water. This was the same project, the same company, the same corner cutting he had tried to warn them about years ago, before they had silenced him and sent him away. Henry reported his findings to Helen, explaining that he needed to shut off water to several sections of the house to safely make repairs. The housekeeper's face went pale. The kitchen was preparing the main course. The guest bathrooms were in constant use. Any disruption would be noticed, and Ms. Constance would not be pleased. She asked if there was any way to fix the problem without anyone knowing. Henry tried to explain that water did not care about dinner parties, that physics was not negotiable. But he could see she was not really listening. She was calculating how to deliver bad news to someone who did not accept bad news. The summons came within minutes. Henry was to present himself to Miss Constance immediately. He followed Helen up a back stairway, acutely aware of his wet clothes and calloused hands, the smell of pipe grease that clung to him despite his best efforts. When he emerged into a small sitting room off the main hall, he found himself face to face with Alexandra Constance for the first time. She stood above him on a small landing, her red dress catching the light, her expression cool and assessing. Diamond earrings glittered at her ears. Every element of her appearance spoke of wealth and power and control. Henry stood below her, work boots still damp, tool belt hanging at his hip. A man from a world she had probably never bothered to notice. The contrast between them was almost theatrical, as if the universe had staged this moment to illustrate everything that divided the powerful from the unseen. Alexandra asked questions in rapid succession, her tone clipped and efficient. How serious was the problem? What did he need? How long would it take? Most importantly, how could this be handled without disturbing her guests? Henry answered as clearly as he could, explaining the technical realities without the jargon that might confuse or the softening that might mislead. When he told her that water followed the laws of pressure and gravity regardless of who was drinking champagne upstairs, something flickered in her eyes that might have been surprise or might have been offense. In the end, she agreed to a compromise. He could shut off water to the less trafficked areas of the house and work as quickly and quietly as possible. But she made her expectations clear. No disruptions, no visibility. No one at this party should have any reason to suspect that anything was less than perfect. Henry nodded and returned to his work, carrying with him the familiar weight of being tolerated rather than respected. While Henry worked in the basement, young Larissa grew restless in her bedroom. She had heard the distant sounds of the party, the music and laughter floating up from below like signals from another world. Amanda had told her to sleep, but sleep would not come. She kept thinking about the drawing she had made, the family that existed only on paper. When she heard unfamiliar sounds from the hallway, metal clanking and water rushing through pipes, curiosity overcame obedience. She found Henry in a service corridor, kneeling beside an open panel in the wall, flashlight clamped between his teeth, hands working steadily on a junction of pipes. She watched him for a moment before speaking, her small voice cutting through the ambient noise. She wanted to know what he was doing and whether the house was going to explode. Henry startled, then recovered, adjusting his tone to the gentle register he used with Audrey. He explained that he was just having a conversation with some grumpy pipes, that they were a little angry, but he was calming them down. Larissa sat on a nearby step, fascinated. She asked why pipes got angry, why a house this big still had problems, why her mother was always too busy for dinner but never too busy for parties. Henry answered her questions as best he could, using simple metaphors and easy humor, treating her with the same respect he would show any person asking honest questions. When she mentioned that she was supposed to eat Christmas Eve dinner with her father, but he had not come, Henry felt something shift in his chest. He told her about Audrey, about their small apartment and their handmade decorations, about how they always ate dinner together, even when it was just soup and bread. Larissa listened with wide eyes, as if he were describing something exotic and wonderful rather than the modest reality of his life. She asked if Audrey ever wished he would stay home instead of going to work. Henry admitted that yes, she did, and so did he. But sometimes, he explained, you do hard things because they let you do good things later. Alexandra found them there, her daughter sitting at the feet of the plumber, engaged in conversation as if they were old friends. Her reaction was immediate and controlled, a polished intervention that revealed nothing of her inner response. She thanked Henry for his work and guided Larissa back toward her room, her hand firm on her daughter's shoulder, as they walked away. Larissa looked back at Henry with an expression he recognized, the look of a child who had found something real in a world of performance and pretense. The situation deteriorated faster than Henry had predicted, despite his temporary repairs. The pressure in the system continued to build. A small leak appeared near the kitchen, sending staff into a quiet panic as they tried to mop up water while keeping the guests oblivious. Clinton George, ever alert to signs of weakness, noticed the unusual activity and cornered Alexandra with barely concealed satisfaction. He suggested that perhaps the company's leadership had been so focused on public image that basic maintenance had been neglected. The implication was clear. If tonight became a story about burst pipes and failed infrastructure, certain people would make sure the narrative reflected poorly on certain other people. Alexandra summoned Henry again, this time to a semi-public confrontation in a service area where several staff members and at least one board member could overhear. She demanded explanations. Why was there still a problem? What had he been doing all this time? Clinton George stood nearby, his presence a reminder that every word was being evaluated, filed away for potential future use. Henry tried to explain the systemic nature of the issue, the years of deferred maintenance, the original construction flaws that predated this night. He mentioned the blueprints, the discrepancy between specifications and installation. He was trying to convey that the problem was not his failure to fix something quickly, but rather someone's decision, long ago, to build something wrong. Clinton George interrupted before he could finish. They did not need engineering lectures from someone whose job was to turn wrenches. They needed results. Alexandra, caught between the pressure of the moment and the politics of her position, made a choice that would haunt her. She told Henry to focus on his work and leave the management decisions to people who understood them. He was a plumber. He should fix the pipes. That was all. The words landed like a slap, not because they were shouted, but because they were so casually dismissive, reducing everything he was to the most reductive possible description. Henry walked away without responding. There was nothing to say that would be heard. He descended back into the mechanical spaces of the house, but something inside him had shifted. He would finish the job because that was who he was. But the extra effort, the going above and beyond, the caring about outcomes for people who clearly did not care about him, that was done. He would do what he was paid for, nothing more. And then he would go home to the one person whose opinion actually mattered, from her hiding spot on the stairs. Larissa had watched the whole exchange. She had seen how her mother spoke to the kind man who had talked to her about pipes and daughters. She did not understand all the words, but she understood tone. She understood unfairness, and something in her young heart began to crack. The explosion came without warning. One moment, Larissa was walking through the upstairs hallway, having slipped away from Amanda again, drawn by some impulse she could not name toward the part of the house where she had last seen Henry. The next moment, the world became chaos. A pipe joint failed catastrophically, sending a geyser of hot water and debris bursting through the ceiling. Tiles fell. Drywall crumbled. Emergency lights flickered on as the main circuit breakers tripped. Larissa screamed as she fell, her leg catching beneath a section of fallen wood and plaster. Water poured around her, pooling on the floor, rising toward her face. She could hear distant shouts, the sounds of panic from the party below. But in her immediate vicinity, there was only the roar of water and her own terrified crying. Henry felt the system fail before he heard it. The pressure gauges swung wildly, and then came the sound of rupturing metal from somewhere above. He dropped his tools and ran, taking stairs two at a time, following the sound of destruction until he found the hallway transformed into something from a nightmare. Water everywhere, debris scattered, electrical sparks dancing dangerously near the pooling flood. And there, trapped and crying, the small blonde girl who had asked him about angry pipes. He did not hesitate. He assessed the scene in seconds, identifying the live wires, the structural hazards, the safest path to the child. Then he moved, splashing through the water, bracing himself against the current, reaching Larissa and lifting the debris from her leg with strength born of desperation. She clung to him as he carried her to safety. Her arms wrapped so tightly around his neck that he could feel her racing heartbeat against his throat. Alexandra arrived to find them there, her daughter soaked and shaking in the arms of the man she had just humiliated in front of her peers. Finn was close behind, along with several staff members and a few guests who had followed the commotion. The scene was unmistakable. The plumber stood in the wreckage, water dripping from his clothes, blood seeping from cuts on his hands, holding the CEO's daughter as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Larissa would not let go. When Alexandra reached for her, the child only tightened her grip on Henry, pressing her face into his shoulder, and then, in a voice that carried clearly despite its smallness, she spoke the words that would change everything. "Stay with us," she whispered. "Please." The first time she had said it. Hours ago, it had been a child's passing fancy. Now, in the aftermath of terror and rescue, it carried the weight of something deeper, a plea that spoke to needs neither mother nor daughter had been willing to acknowledge. Alexandra stared at them both, and for the first time since the party began, her carefully constructed mask began to crack. The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Henry, with Alexandra's full backing, took command of the crisis response. He coordinated with Finn and the household staff, organizing teams to shut off water mains, redirect flow, protect undamaged areas of the house. He worked with a calm efficiency that transformed the perception of everyone who watched. This was not a man who turned wrenches. This was someone who understood systems, who could lead under pressure, who had skills that had nothing to do with his job title. Clinton George attempted to interfere, suggesting that professionals should be called, that the liability issues were too significant to leave in the hands of a service worker. Alexandra silenced him with a single sharp sentence. She told him that this man had just saved her daughter and that if Clinton had a problem with her decisions, he could take it up with the board after the holidays. It was the first time she had directly challenged his authority, and the shock on his face was almost worth everything that had preceded it. By the time the immediate crisis was contained, the party had dissolved. Guests made their excuses and departed, some sympathetic, some already composing the gossip they would share at tomorrow's brunch. The string quartet packed up their instruments. The caterers wrapped uneaten food. The mansion, which had gleamed with such artificial perfection, now showed its wounds honestly. Water stains on walls, sections of hallway blocked off, emergency lighting casting harsh shadows where chandeliers had sparkled. In a quiet moment between crises, Alexandra found Henry in the mechanical room, reviewing the system to ensure no further failures were imminent. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. When she finally found words, they came slowly, carefully, as if she were learning a new language. She apologized, not the polished apology of press releases and legal settlements, but something raw and uncomfortable. She admitted that she had been wrong to dismiss him, wrong to reduce him to a job title, wrong to care more about her image than about the safety of her home and her child. Henry accepted her apology with a simple nod. He told her that he understood pressure, understood making bad choices when every option seemed wrong. He was not interested in her guilt. He was interested in making sure nobody got hurt again tonight. As the night deepened and the blizzard howled outside, a new problem emerged. Henry had no way home. His truck sat in the driveway, buried under accumulating snow, and the roads had become impassable. More pressingly, his daughter sat alone in their apartment, waiting for a father who had promised to return before midnight. Alexandra made the decision before Henry could fully articulate his concern. She would send her driver, with the four-wheel drive SUV equipped for exactly this kind of weather, to bring Audrey to the mansion. Both families would wait out the storm together. Henry protested that he did not want to impose, that his daughter would be fine, that they had imposed enough already. Alexandra cut him off with quiet firmness. He had saved her daughter's life. Allowing his daughter to spend Christmas Eve alone in a blizzard was not an imposition she was willing to accept. The driver returned an hour later. Audrey, clutching a small backpack and staring wide-eyed at the mansion looming out of the snow. She had never seen anything like it. The Christmas tree in the foyer, even damaged by the night's events, was larger than her entire bedroom. The ceilings soared to heights she could not comprehend, and everywhere she looked, there were remnants of a world she had only glimpsed in movies and imagination. Larissa came thundering down the stairs the moment she heard Audrey had arrived. The two girls regarded each other with the cautious curiosity of children meeting across a cultural divide. Larissa wore silk pajamas that cost more than Audrey's entire wardrobe. Audrey wore a second-hand sweater and jeans that were slightly too short. But within minutes, none of that mattered. Larissa grabbed Audrey's hand and pulled her toward the playroom, chattering about toys and games and how glad she was to have a friend to share Christmas Eve with, for the first time that night. The mansion filled with the sound of genuine laughter. The four of them gathered for a late meal in the informal dining room. The fancy crystal and china replaced by simple plates and comfort food the kitchen staff had prepared before leaving for their own holiday celebrations. Alexandra had changed out of her designer dress into a soft cardigan and slacks, the transformation making her look younger and more human than she had all evening. Henry had cleaned up as best he could, his work clothes now dry if not presentable. The cuts on his hands bandaged with supplies from the mansion's extensive first aid kit. The conversation started awkwardly. Two strangers and two children trying to find common ground. But Audrey, with the unfiltered honesty of childhood, broke the ice by asking Larissa if her mother always threw parties this fancy. Larissa replied that yes, but she never got to go to them. She always had to stay in her room. This led to a discussion of Christmas traditions, of trees and decorations and what made the holiday special. Audrey described their tiny apartment tree with its handmade ornaments. Larissa described feeling like an outsider in her own home. Both girls discovered they had been dreaming of the same thing, a Christmas where they simply belonged. As the children yawned and fought against sleep, the adults found themselves talking with unexpected openness. Alexandra spoke of the pressures she faced, the constant performance required to maintain her position, the way she had let ambition and fear crowd out the connections that actually mattered. Henry spoke of loss and perseverance, of choosing presence over prosperity, of the things his daughter had taught him about what was truly essential. They were not romantic confessions or dramatic revelations. They were simply two people recognizing in each other the struggle of trying to do right in a world that often rewarded wrong. The fire crackled in the hearth. Snow continued to fall outside the windows. The mansion, stripped of its pretensions by the night's events, felt almost cozy when Larissa, drowsy on the sofa, reached for Henry's hand and repeated her whispered plea. "Stay with us, please." The words carried a different weight. She was not asking him to remain in this moment of crisis. She was asking for something larger, something that pointed toward a future none of them had planned. Alexandra heard her daughter's words and felt them resonate in chambers of her heart she had long kept sealed. She looked at Henry, at this man who had entered her home as a servant and proven himself the most honorable person she had encountered in years. She did not know what the future held. She could not promise that the walls between their worlds would crumble easily, but she could offer a beginning. She asked Henry if he would consider staying in touch after the storm cleared, not as a service provider, but as a friend, as someone she wanted her daughter to know, as someone she found herself wanting to know better. Henry met her eyes and saw something genuine there. Something that had nothing to do with money or status or the games powerful people played. He smiled, the first real smile of the entire night, and said he would like that. Outside. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, covering the divisions between rich and poor, powerful and invisible. Inside, 4 people who had never expected to find each other sat together in the warmth. 2 broken families discovering they might fit together into something whole. Sometimes it takes a burst pipe on a winter night and a child's whispered pleas to repair not just a house, but hearts that had forgotten how to trust. And sometimes Christmas miracles come not from magic, but from the simple courage of people choosing to see each other clearly, across all the distances the world puts between them.